Welcome back to the channel and a review of the Champions Cup. Little belatedly, really busy weekend means I'm only getting around to doing it now, but nonetheless there are things for us to talk about when it comes to the Champions Cup so far this season. So I'll look back on the weekend we've just had and in particular talk about rotation, because rotation was a topic of hot debate when the teams were announced at the end of last week, and the question of whether teams should rotate for the Champions Cup. It is supposed to be the best of the best. Do you want to see teams rotating their teams so heavily in the tournament? So loads of different things to get into. As I say, apologies for the slight delay in the video. It's just one of those things. Sometimes it's hard to find the time, but drop a comment down below. Let me know what you make of the Champions Cup this season. Let me know what you make of teams rotating or anything else that springs to mind. You can put it in the comment section. Welcome back if you have watched the channel before, and if you're new here, welcome along. If I earn your subscription, then I'd really appreciate it. Like the video, all of that stuff. Let's get into it. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the rotation. In particular for the weekend we just had, it was Sale away to Leinster, Bristol away to Bordeaux, Leicester Tigers away to Stade Francais as well. There were quite a few English clubs that rotated their teams pretty heavily. It was 13 changes for Bristol from the team that beat Lyon. Sale and Leicester also made a lot of changes. And naturally that leads to discussion of, should teams be doing this? It's supposed to be the Champions Cup. It isn't great to see teams rotating their teams so heavily. Now, the irony being this weekend is actually quite a bad weekend to try and make that argument, because Sale were brilliant away to Leinster, leading at half-time, end up losing by 10 points, but even so I think a much better performance, a much closer result than any of us would have expected when you compared the two 23s. Leicester go away with a weakened team and beat Stade Francais, another brilliant game late on Sunday, and Bristol lose quite heavily, but actually, and I was covering this game, they were better than people would have expected them to. I mean, Bordeaux looked really good, and I'll come on to them in a second when I start running through the pools and talking about the teams. But even Bristol, a couple of young guys in there, players making their Champions Cup debut, had a better showing than a lot of people were expecting. So this weekend, it's quite a weak argument to say when teams rotate their squads, it doesn't look great. And I suppose on the flip side of that, Bath went with a really full-strength team to play Cardiff, who aren't playing well at all, who are now 2 from 2 in terms of defeats. But it was still a much closer game than we were expecting. I wonder why that is. Is there something this year about the World Cup that even though we're seeing teams rotate, we haven't seen I think Gloucester the other year went to Leinster and lost 57-0. We've seen various other incredibly high scorelines go against teams when they've rotated, which we haven't so far this season. And it's not just the English clubs that have done it. I know we saw the Stormers do it in week 1. They almost got a losing bonus point at Leicester. Other teams are doing it as well. So is this an issue? My view on it is it comes back to something that I've mentioned on the channel already. You would have seen it discussed elsewhere within rugby media and social media and all that sort of stuff. The pool stages, too many teams get through. You've got pools of 6 and 4 teams get into the last 16, which means if you're a Sale, if you're a Bristol, and you won your opening game, you can afford to rotate your squads, because even if you lose, you've still got a pretty good chance of getting yourself into that last 16. Whilst the Champions Cup has been good, and I am going to get onto this in a second because I've really enjoyed the first 2 weekends, I think it more comes down to the structure not quite being where it needs to be in terms of the pool stages. I don't necessarily blame the teams, and actually speaking to Pat Lam after the game, he basically said Bristol, they had their game on Saturday against Bordeaux. They then travelled back late on Sunday. I don't know if that's just because that's the flights they could get. They didn't charter a plane as they sometimes do. So they got back late on Sunday, so they weren't in on Monday. Then they've got Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they're heading up to Newcastle in the Premiership on Friday. And at some point, you need to rotate your squad because they've been going week to week to week. You might disagree with that argument, but I think you can understand why teams have rotated. But I think if the pool stage was more competitive, if having just won your first game wasn't enough to really be able to rely upon, then you might see teams have to go more stronger, essentially. But let me know what you make of it, because let's get on to the tournament. The Champions Cup is a funny one, right? Because once upon a time, it was the jewel in the crown of European rugby. You look back to its heyday, Munsters and Toulouse and some of the brilliant pool games we've got. And it's been affected by COVID. COVID didn't help. The changing and always tweaking of the pool stages and structure of the tournament hasn't helped either. So I wasn't feeling that positive before the Champions Cup this year. But the last 2 weekends have been sensational. You look at all of the pools and I think they're incredibly competitive. Pool 1, Bordeaux are top, having won both of their games, and then you've got Lyon, the Bulls, Saracens and Bristol, who've all won one. Connacht are bottom, they've lost both their games. In Pool 2, you've got Toulouse and Bath, who've won both of their games. They're on 10 points, the maximum amount at the top of the pool. Then you've got Ulster and Harlequins, who've won one each, Racing 92 and Cardiff, who haven't. And you go through the rest of the pools as well. They are competitive. I think when we get into January and we get into the second half of pool fixtures, was it 12th of January, I think, is the third round, and then the fourth round following that, I think we could have some really exciting scenarios for whether teams will qualify or not. Going back to what I said at the start, I still think it's an issue that 4 of 6 teams get through. But nonetheless, so far this season, I think the Champions Cup has been brilliant. I think it's been really entertaining. We've had some great games. So let's run through the various pools. As I did the other week with this, it's kind of hard to mention every game and every team. So I'll run through the pools and just speak about what comes to mind for me. Pool 1, Bordeaux top. Well, as I say, I was covering this game, and even though it was a weakened Bristol team, they were brilliant. I mean, Damien Penaud, what a signing he is. I think he's one of the best wingers in the world at the moment. He tore them apart. He comes off his wing. He's always looking for extra work. A brilliant finisher. He set up 2 tries as well. But then you look at the rest of that back line. Luku, scrum half. Jalabert, fly half. Mofanar in the centres. Louis Biel-Biarré on another wing. They're packed full of quality. And in Bordeaux, the highest attendance of the weekend as well. I think it was about 28,000. It was a sellout in Bordeaux. Clearly a team that are heading in the right direction. Their rugby is in a great place at the moment. And as I said already, you look at the rest of Pool 1. Lyon with an important win, actually, against the Bulls. They left it late there, and the Bulls had an opportunity to kick a penalty to take the lead late on that they missed. But it's a really good example, Lyon, in that Bordeaux are on 10 points, Lyon are second on 7 points, and then you've got Saracens, the Bulls, and Bristol all on 5 points. The importance of picking up bonus points. That is the difference at the moment between Lyon having just a little cushion there with a couple of points and them being on level on points with the others. Again, when we get to the next couple of rounds of fixtures in January, bonus points are going to be crucial. So Lyon in a pretty good spot there. Saracens, you would still back to be able to get themselves out of the pool. They haven't been overly convincing. Decent win against Connacht, but a lot of points conceded as well. Bristol, I think Bristol are relying on their home form. I think if they're relying on trying to pick up wins at home, I would imagine. So are they going to sneak through? Is it too late for Connacht? We'll wait and see. Into Pool 2, Toulouse and Bath, both on top, 10 points. Toulouse looks seriously good. I mean, they put Harlequins away for a lot of that game. Even in the early parts of the second half, the scoreline was still quite even. I was watching the game back, so I couldn't watch it live. And around the 50-minute mark, Toulouse were in the lead, but you're thinking, there's not too much in this in terms of the scoreboard. And then the final score, they win incredibly easily. They look very, very good. How much of a detriment will it be losing Antoine Dupont for the latter stages of the tournament is a big question. And then to also give credit to Bath, because if I said to you before the Champions Cup started, okay, after 2 games, Toulouse are top on 10 points, I don't think you'll be too shocked. I'd say there's another team also on 10 points. Who is it? Who would you go for in that pool? I think you'd say Ulster or Racing 92 before Bath, possibly even Harlequins before Bath as well. But the fact that Bath are there, it's just clicking at the moment. It's working. Winning is becoming a habit for them in the way that losing became a habit a couple of years ago. They're in a very good place, as I said on the last video. Ulster also with a good win against Racing, who are struggling. It's interesting, actually, that the top 2 teams in the top 14, which is Racing and Toulon at the start of the season, have struggled at the start of the Champions Cup. Wonder why. I wonder if there's anything in that. Maybe something for another day. I've got a few theories bubbling away, but I probably need to flesh them out a little bit more. Cardiff struggling. I mean, the Welsh game is in a tough place at the moment. Cardiff, a great performance, great occasion by all accounts at the Arms Park, playing Bath. That kind of Southwest England Anglo-Welsh rivalry means that's a fixture that is going to get a big crowd in for them. But even so, they're bottom of that pool. In terms of Pool 3, Northampton and Exeter, I mean, geez, what a start for them. And again, looking at, if we ask the same question that I asked for Pool 2, in that if you said there are 2 teams after the first 2 games that have won both their games, I think most people will be saying Munster and Toulon in that pool. But they're the teams that are bottom. Northampton top. Northampton are the real deal. I'm so intrigued by Saints fans on this because for years, they have scored tries at will and they've had a leaky defence. They haven't been good enough up front. They'd go away to a Premiership semi-final and they would lose pretty comfortably. But it looks like Lee Radford coming in as defence coach, I feel like they're in a different position. Are they going to be good enough to win silverware? It looks like they're going to be good enough to get themselves to the knockout stages of Europe, which they haven't done in a couple of years, so that's a great thing. How good are they? How much more have they kicked on? Are they now in a position to win silverware? I mean more in the Premiership there. I'm not expecting them to win the Champions Cup, but they've had a couple of great wins there, as have Exeter. I mean, beating Toulon and Munster, two of the traditional giants of the European Champions Cup, of European rugby, is noteworthy. They seem ahead of schedule in their development, Exeter 2.0 and all that. But you've still got Munster in there. How important for Munster, that draw against Bayonne? They might end up looking back at that, I think, because that was such a missed opportunity in the opening weekend. Hopefully it doesn't punish them too much, but I think that's the danger for Munster. And then I'll finish off in Pool 4. So Leinster and Leicester top, and then you've got Sale and the Stormers on 4 points. La Rochelle, having lost both their games, couple of bonus points, and Stade Francais bottom. What's going on with La Rochelle? Tough start to the top 14 season. They've lost their opening 2 games in the Champions Cup. Now, okay, the caveat is they've hosted Leinster, who, as always, even though Leinster actually haven't looked as incredible as they have in previous seasons, it's still Leinster. So they lost at home to Leinster, and then they have a tough away trip to the Stormers, which they are seconds away from winning. Late try for the Stormers, Marnie Libok with the conversion, and so they are 0 from 2. The ironic thing, though, is La Rochelle. You'd still back them to get through because of the quality they have in that side. But presuming they do get through, but they're one of the weaker seeds, all of a sudden we could have an incredible matchup. Imagine if it ends up being Toulouse-La Rochelle, because Toulouse are one of the higher seeds, La Rochelle one of the lower seeds, in a last 16. That would be absolutely fascinating, because I'd still back La Rochelle to be able to get through, but at the same time, something's not quite clicking. And also, mention Marnie Libok, because what a year he has had. He has had a brilliant 2023. He became the starting fly half for the Springboks and was a crucial part of them developing their game and expanding their attack. But then he had the brutal situation of being hooked in the first half of a semi-final and then not making the Springboks match day 23 for the final. For understandable reasons, for reasons that paid off. I'm not criticising that decision, but even so, it has been a whirlwind of a 2023 for him. And the big question mark over him, a lot of the time, has been his kicking. And I think he does actually have clutch kicking performances under his belt. It's just how regularly they happen. So for him to hit that winning conversion, I was really pleased to see that happen. And a big win for the Stormers. And I want the Champions Cup I want it to take hold of the South African rugby public. I don't know at the moment of whether it is or not. I think it could do. It's tough because you lose that away supporter element because it's so far, it's so expensive for fans in South Africa to travel up here, for fans here to travel down there. So I really want it to work. Is it at the moment? I think we need to see a team go deep into the competition and potentially win it to really galvanise the South African support. But that's kind of my general roundup of the second weekend of the Champions Cup. I'm enjoying it way more than I expected to, which I'm really pleased about. I'm pleased that I was wrong, although I still think I'm right on the fact that 4 teams going through a pool of 6. It's just too much, in my opinion. But anyway, drop a comment down below. Anything that I've touched upon, rotation, the teams, everything like that. Like the video as well. And also make sure you're subscribed to the channel. And I'll see you in the next one.